Hope you can start.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the July program of Varahamihira Science Forum. My name is Gopu. I'll do a brief introduction of the Science Forum. Then I'll hand it over to Ramanan for an introduction of the speaker. After which we'll have today's lecture on Ayurveda and whether Ayurveda is relevant. I think it's a very suitable topic. We've scheduled this talk for May, but unfortunately the speaker got a little ill, so we had to postpone it. But we are delighted he is here. For those of you of the public who want to ask any questions at the end of the lecture, you can just type in your questions in the YouTube comments forum. And at the end of the lecture, Badri will pass on the questions to the speaker. Varahamihira Science Forum was started a few years back. We have a website, varahamihirasf.blogspot.com, which has all the recordings of the previous talks, the announcements of any upcoming programs we have, and so on. We are on social media. We are in Facebook, we are in Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Instagram is something that one of our volunteers has just recently started. You can just search for the phrase Varahamihira Science Forum in these websites and you will stumble upon us. It's also there in our invitations. We are also very active on WhatsApp. We have both an events notification group and a discussion group. And you can just message one of us using these numbers to send a message, and we'll be happy to add you to the WhatsApp groups, either the events or the discussion group. They have been active. They discuss more than just the lectures that we conduct. It's any contemporary science issues. We are fundamentally mostly a social media group. We started this because, a few years back, we had this feeling that Madras has been declared or considered the cultural capital of India. Should science not be considered part of our culture? Yes, but there are very few lectures on science and very few that are made for the general public. There are very few popular lectures. There may be technical lectures. There are seminars and conferences and all that. There are symposia, but they generally tend to be targeted at a very specific audience. That is the professionals of that particular industry, whatever the industry be, medicine or civil engineering or automobiles or space or whatever it is, nuclear technology, whatever. It is targeted at that audience, not the general public. So we thought we had a felt need for a general forum to discuss science and to bring science to the public. We also wanted to use social media to build a community where we can discuss these matters. So we started a WhatsApp group, we started a Facebook page, we have a YouTube channel, and we think in current situation where presentation matters as much as the substance, we are interested as much in the story and not just the fact, because there's a lot of science tends to be presented in a dry technical way, and we wanted to get away from that. So we are interested in style and substance. So we get both amateur and professional speakers to talk about these subjects. So this is a non-profit attempt, but we've had donations. We quite happily accept donations, and people have contributed to us in the past, and you are welcome to contribute if you'd like. And we have a YouTube channel where all the lectures, YouTube videos of the lectures have been uploaded. This one comes live. It's a live webcast. At the end of the webcast, the video will be uploaded on YouTube, so you can go see it there. We've tried some lectures in Tamil. We plan some in schools and colleges and so on. We'll do this after the lockdown, perhaps. It's not the first forum that does that. We've had societies in the past that have done several programs. They have been confined at certain locations like IIT campus or engineering colleges or the Sanskrit College, KSR Research Institute. Workshops and programs. People have done programs at their houses. Mad Science does this thing called Science at the Sabha, the Academy. The other organizations that do have certain public interaction programs like the Planetarium in Kottapuram, they did one for two of the Venus transits in 2004 and 2012, and also Venus transit in 2008. I never get tired of saying this, that Madras is one of the few cities where you can go to the rooftop and see a rocket launch from Sriharikota. We can literally watch that. This is literally my rooftop. I took a photo. We have a trail of the rocket coming. This is from one of the libraries. And so given all that, we've had this forum start quite a few years back. We have continuously run this monthly lecture program almost every month. We've had a couple of hiccups here and there. One because of the lockdown, one because the speaker had a problem and so on. So, but generally we've had a very successful run of the programs. Besides that, we've also done a couple of courses. Recently, we conducted a course on Indian mathematics and astronomy. Our most recent, the first 3 or 4 versions were done in physical locations. The most recent one was done in at online, entirely online, and we had a couple of sessions do entirely online, including one for children. Besides the general course introduction to Indian mathematics and astronomy, we had one on one specific abstract. Badri gave a course on Kuttaka linear indeterminate equations, which is Aryabhata's algorithm to solve linear indeterminate equations. And then he continued with another workshop on Bhavana and Chakravala, which are the algorithms developed by Brahmagupta and Bhaskara to find solutions to quadratic indeterminate equations as opposed to linear. So most recently, just earlier this month, we had a combined workshop called Bija Ganitam, combining both Kuttaka and Bhavana and Chakravala. We just completed that. So we'll continue to offer such courses in the future. We had speakers speak on a variety of interesting topics. Arvind Gupta spoke to us about science through toys. We had meteorologists talk about weather and climate and Sangam poetry, ancient Tamil poetry. We had Dr. Uttara Dhararajan talk about Lilavati's daughters, women scientists of India. We had Venkatesh Ramakrishnan talk about advanced technological advances in the city. So not just a particular technology, but taking Madras as a city's history, has a history of the latest science and technology come here, how it is adapted, how it is implemented, what was the acceptance, what was the media reaction, public reaction, so on. So a bit of a history of the acceptance and technology. We had celebrity speakers like Valinu Ramchandran gave a talk about a couple of talks for us. We had Shashwat talk about the Indian monsoon. We had one on nutrition in food, and we had it a bit of Tamil and English. Unavin Uyirotam. We had a very interesting talk on the construction of the Periyar Dam by Kannan Rajendran. So these things. On the medical issue, today we're talking about medicine, Ayurveda. We had a few lectures on medicine. We've had lectures on biology, conservation, several things. I'll just focus on 3 or 4 lectures that we had on medicine. One of our earliest speakers was Sivaraman, who gave us a brief introduction to bacteriophages. Bacteriophages were used before antibiotics became popular. So Sivaraman talked about the history of using of phages to treat diseases before antibiotics became popular in the 1940s. We had a lecture by Nishant Chandrasekhar, who gave us a history of neuroscience. We had one on the spread of viruses just after the lockdown was implemented and the coronavirus was becoming a thing. Last year, Ramanan Jagannathan, one of our coordinators, gave a talk about that. And today we have Dr. Rammanohar. He will be speaking about Ayurveda. He's an Ayurvedic doctor himself and is a research director at the Amrita School of Ayurveda. I first heard him a couple of years back at a seminar at Tamil Virtual Academy organized by the KV Sharma Foundation. If you remember, this was the same place where we also heard Dr. Jagtap the first time, and Dr. Jagtap gladly joined us a couple of months back to give us a lecture on Indian history. And today we have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Rammanohar on Indian Ayurveda. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Ramanan to introduce the speaker of the day. Ramanan.
Yeah. Thanks, Gopu. As Gopu mentioned, we have a WhatsApp group to discuss science, and we discuss everything under the sky, and most of it is not science, okay? But one of the interesting topics is on Ayurveda and its effectiveness as against modern medicine. It is an evergreen and hot topic, and most of the time the conversations end in a stalemate. Questions like, what are the origins of Ayurveda? What books explain Indian medicine and its evolution and development? What is the theoretical understanding of the human body, anatomy, disease, cure, surgery, diet, health practices, etc.? What did foreigners like Greek and Chinese or Arab visitors to India write about Ayurveda? And has Ayurveda become obsolete with the introduction of European medical practices like vaccination, sterilization, study of blood flow? Or does Ayurveda still hold valid ideas and treatments? Can it be updated? These were not explicitly asked, but implicitly asked. And as a science forum admins, we thought it would be a good idea to get an authority to speak about the topic and thereby provide the audience to ask questions about the same. So that is how the talk today came into being. And about the speaker, Dr. Rammanohar, he received his BAMS degree from Bardiyar University in 1991 and MD in Ayurveda from Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Bengaluru in 2001. He has been contributing in the field of Ayurvedic research since the last 30 years. And his publications include research papers in index journals and chapters in books. He is presently serving as a research director at Amirda Center of Advanced Research in Ayurveda, attached to Amirda School of Ayurveda. This is managed by Amirda Vishwa Vidyapeetham. And I'm as eagerly looking forward to this talk as everyone here, and I have got my own questions to ask Dr. Rammanohar. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for the warm introduction. It's a very great honor and pleasure to be present here on this forum today to share some insights on Ayurveda and its contemporary relevance. So let me just share my screen. I have put up some slides, though I may also deviate from the slides. It's just a kind of an outline to, bring some focus into our discussion. It's a very interesting and, a provocative question for an Ayurvedic physician. If you ask, is Ayurveda relevant? And it may sound also as a question that's being asked only in contemporary times, but I want to bring the attention of all the viewers to the fact that this question was asked several thousands of years ago. And our texts seem to anticipate that these questions would be asked repeatedly. And in fact, one of the first things that a student of Ayurveda classically was introduced to was to ask this question and find out that answer before they even started the study of Ayurveda. So across time and space, as long as Ayurveda has survived, this question has been asked. So a Shastra, if you have to study any Indian Shastra, you must know the Prayojanam. Prayojanam anuddishya mudhovi pravartate. If you do not know the Prayojana, there is no interest in actually studying that Shastra. So all the study of the Shastra begins with this discussion. What is the use of learning Ayurveda? What will I gain? What will the world gain if I study Ayurveda? So this is there in the beginning itself. So it's not a new question. So at the time of origination of Ayurveda itself, this question was raised by a student of Ayurveda. And that is how I want to introduce the classical Ayurvedic texts before this audience. Today, I don't intend to make a descriptive history of Ayurveda. You can read anywhere. What are the theories of Ayurveda? I mean, that is not going to be of interest because that would be a very dry discourse. I want to show snippets here and there and, glimpses into this tradition and leave it to the audience to decide, I mean, what is the answer? Is Ayurveda relevant or not? I wouldn't want to answer that question. I would like to hear from all those who are attending at the end of this session what you feel. What is the answer that you would give to this question that with which we are beginning our discussion? So there has been a viewpoint, very strong viewpoint within the tradition itself that Ayurveda is useless. I mean, if you can put it very as bluntly as you can, this question has been, or this statement has been made in the classical text of Ayurveda itself, as a Purva Paksha, or as an alternative statement that needs to be examined, which cannot be dismissed, which needs to be addressed. So this Charaka Samhita, when you look at the old texts of Ayurveda, there are three great textbooks which have come to be called as the Brihatrayi, or the Great Triad, Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhata. They are, separated by enormous time, in enormous time frame, thousands of years apart, but somehow they got clubbed together. I mean, that's because of this remarkable continuity of Ayurveda, and it's very difficult to trace the origins of the older texts. We just can't see into the mist of time, and they just disappear into antiquity. And what we have is already well developed, edited, modernized versions of an existing tradition. So if you look at these textbooks of Ayurveda, I don't know if there are any such examples of texts that have survived so long. They are not new texts, old texts, re-edited, revised, redacted, recovered, and then, that continuity survives. So we have multiple layers, chronological layers in these textbooks. It's very difficult to trace out the sources or the origin. Which are the layers that belong to the older period, which are the ones that come later. So when you look at these Brihat rays, they have all gone through different, uh, stages of development. And what is interesting is also that, if you look at the Charaka Samhita, it's actually a student's notes. So the most celebrated textbook of Ayurveda is actually the notes of a student, a very brilliant student of the sector. This also points out that Ayurvedic education was very student focused. The whole focus was on empowering the student. And when the student becomes capable of writing a treatise, that was considered to be the success of the teacher. So the teacher was never glorified. So this book was known as Agnivesha Tantra. And Agnivesha he actually literally means somebody who can enter into fire. The fire of, the acid test, of scrutiny, of inquiry. So that is the meaning of the word Agnivesha. So in the Charaka Samhita, there is a conversation between a skeptic and a great physician, sage Atreya, which is witnessed by his students, including Agnivesha. But according to a narrative in a later textbook, which is called the Ashtanga Hridayam, which is the third book amongst these three classical texts. And very interestingly, the very names of these texts have some message to convey. Charaka means Charaiveti, the one who keeps wandering in search of knowledge. So Ayurveda, Charaka Samhita also says, Na chaiva yasti sudaram Ayurveda sa param. There is no limit to the knowledge of Ayurveda. Pritsno hi loko buddhimada macharya. The whole world is the teacher. So where can you stop searching? You have to search the whole world. So Charaka was wandering. He was wandering in whatever world he could travel at that time and conveyed the message that we must also compile knowledge from all possible sources. Sushruta is well heard. Sushrutam, he's a well heard person. So the listener. So if you have to compile knowledge, you have to be a listener. You have to listen to everybody and everything. So Sushruta is a well heard person. Charaka is a well traveled, well exposed individual. And Vagbhata is the person. The third text is the perfect expression, most refined way of articulating, codifying the text. So Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhata, the Brihatrais represent the whole process of knowledge building that was there in Ayurveda. That exploration, that openness, and then very meticulous codification. So these three texts represent this whole process of knowledge development in Ayurveda. So in the Ashtanga Hridayam, this conversation actually happens between the teacher and the student. It's not an external person. And this is also symbolic, but the texts have documented, the texts seem to give an hint that there would always be questioning, and that this is healthy and necessary for the robustness of the knowledge system, that there will be external as well as internal skepticism. As long as Ayurveda survives, as long as Ayurveda is there in society, there will be people questioning it from outside as well as from inside. So both internal and external skepticism, that is ingrained in these three classical textbooks, which really form the cornerstone of the whole knowledge edifice of the knowledge of Ayurveda. So what is this questioning that happens? So the classical Ayurvedic texts are all more in the form of a dialogue between the student and the teacher, or they are actually codifications of great conferences that were held, different experts coming together, discussing, arguing, debating, and then, their conclusions are codified. Most of the chapters are like that. So all the chapters begin by a student asking a question. How is it? It is like that. Then the teacher gives an explanation. Student poses a counter question, and then there is a conclusion and a summary. And then another chapter would be a conference. People from different parts of the then known world, assembling together. The first World Health Assembly, I mean, if we can put it that way, could have perhaps happened in the Himalayan valley, where all the great experts in the field were brought together to discuss about the pandemics and health problems that people all over the world were facing. That's how the Charaka Samhita begins. The Charaka Samhita begins with an account of a World Health Assembly of those days, as big as the world was, so many thousands of years ago. And they all have a deliberation. So it's not some whimsical ideas of a few individuals. This idea of consensus, this idea of, verification by other individuals. Ayurveda has this concept of Siddhanta. Siddhanta nama yes bahubid parikshagai bahuvitham pariksha stapyate nirnaya. Siddhanta is that which is an end of a discussion. Siddhanto siddho yasya, where you have arrived at the final consensus or conclusion. Bahubhi parikshagai, by different investigations. Bahuvitham pariksha, having investigated in multifarious ways, you have come to a very concrete conclusion. So Ayurveda is based on such siddhantas, which have been questioned, which have been examined, which are continuously, updated and codified. So all possible propositions and statements are examined very carefully, and all alternative viewpoints are raised and analyzed before arriving at a conclusion. So the textual teachings are there, which have to be studied carefully, which is like today's literature review. And then it has to be verified by the student's investigation. Pariksha, it was called. Pariksha had to be done on the teachings. And then you get personal experience. You verify it yourself. So research in that way was ingrained in the teaching process itself. The students learned the teachings and then they investigated themselves. So in our tradition, the way of studying the text was to actually attack it, oppose it. Padartho the padacheda, vakyartho vakyojana. You do the pada padartha, vakyartha vakyojana, get the meaning. Then you do an akshepa. Akshepo the samadhanam. Ask many questions as you can. Attack it as much as you can. There is a lot of adrenaline and thrill involved in studying a classical text. There is a lot of aggression encouraged from the student. I have witnessed in some old Ayurveda gurukulams that were surviving in Kerala the last decades. It's difficult sometimes to see who is the student or the teacher. The student is encouraged to ask as many questions as possible, because there should be no question that is left. If the teaching is to be complete, all the Purva Paksha should be raised. And that is an ideal teacher who is able to either directly answer or enable the student to get the samadhanas. This is very similar to the modern. I was very much reminded about this modern idea of falsifiability in science. I don't say it's exactly the same, but the proof is not what is the basis. The inability to falsify or to oppose a particular viewpoint, when you are not able to find a counter argument or a counter view or a counter evidence, that is when you accept that. That is what the idea of a siddhanta. So the whole atmosphere is one of great questioning, debate, examining possibilities, and this is how we encounter the classical text of. And if you need to get the spirit, we need to get initiated into the Sanskrit, because most of these modern translations are very dry, very descriptive. It looks like you have a set of prescriptions from an Ayurvedic text, but if you need to get into the spirit, this feeling of that old process of knowledge building, then you need to read the classical texts in the original and get into their deeper insights. So here is a character called Maitreya. He asks the great teacher Atreya a question. See, I am seeing, you are all telling so many great things about Ayurveda, but I am seeing something which is very disturbing. It's a master of observation that there are patients who receive Ayurvedic treatment, they are failing to recover, and they even die. This is there. In not only today, that those days also, it was very much observed. People taking Ayurvedic medicines were dying. And on the other hand, we see many sick people who recover even when they do not receive any treatment. So is medicine more dangerous than no medicine? This is the fundamental question a student of Ayurveda was exposed to before he starts the study of Ayurveda. Those who receive treatment may recover or get worse and die. And there are patients who do not receive treatment and they also may not recover and they get worse. Pratikurvan siddhyati, apratikurvan siddhyati. Pratikurvan mriyate, apratikurvan mriyate. So there is no consistency. There is no correlation between the treatment and the outcome. It's a very statistical question that is being asked by Maitreya. Where is the proof? How can I believe that your treatment works? Because what we observe contradicts, your statements. So he comes to the conclusion. Maitreya makes this great accusation against Ayurveda, which is recorded in the Charaka Samhita. The treatment, chikitsa and achikitsa, are equal. This is bullshit. This is just nonsense. Ayurveda is just nonsense. This is how the Charaka Samhita puts forth the Purvapaksha. I don't think we can have a stronger reputation against Ayurveda even today. So the greatest opposition to Ayurveda was anticipated in the text, and they seem to give a hint that this question will be repeatedly asked, and we need to know how to answer. And the answer of Atreya is also very interesting. He does not dismiss Maitreya. He says there is just a flaw in your thinking and observation. So let me try to explain. So Ayurveda, here you can see it is a knowledge system. It's not a belief system. If it was a belief system, there is no need to pose this kind of a question and even take the trouble to give an answer. It might have even been a constructed situation, or it must have been, something that took place, but then, it has been set into a kind of framework in which this question, in fact, the students are being encouraged to ask this question. That's why it's there in the textbook. That they must examine this Purvapaksha. So Atreya's answer, he says, treatment and no treatment are not equal. Why? Because there are diseases that are self-limiting. So Ayurveda was the first medical system to tell that there are diseases that are self-limiting. They don't need treatment. Vinapi kriya swasthyam gachadam shodashamshaya. Where without any kriya, the patient will become okay. Now, vaidyaha atara roga pramoksha karanam. Only a fool here will say that I have treated. I think the modern generation of Ayurveda physicians don't have this question. That is why Ayurveda is getting into trouble nowadays. These aspects are not taught in Ayurvedic. These sections of the text are completely ignored because they are not dealing with any treatments. They are setting the whole background for you to enter into the treatment. So there are self-limiting diseases, he says. And there are also diseases that require treatment to resolve. In such diseases, only treatment will work. If they don't get treatment, they will become worse. Atreya is very clearly telling, you need to look at the prognostic outlook before you treat. I read somewhere in, I think it was in Lancet many decades ago, that clinical encounters in medical practice, 85% are for diseases that don't need any intervention. It's just for assurance that patients go. 15% are for diseases that wouldn't respond anyway. And only 5% of actual clinical encounters with a physician are for diseases that really require some medical intervention. And that's the reason why 85% of the time there is unnecessary medication, unnecessary prescription, even with modern medicine. If you look at the United States, they clearly say the leading cause of death is heart disease. The second leading cause is cancer. And the third leading cause is the medical doctor. Now, in the United States, they have data. And so they are clearly telling that is a medical error, unnecessary treatment. So most of the time, the Charaka Samhita is one of the texts which also gives a public warning. Tasmanna bhishaja yuktam yukti bahyena beshtam. The text is mostly speaking to the physician, but suddenly it turns to the public and makes a big warning. Whoever is interested in safeguarding their health or life, please don't take medicines from a doctor who gives an irrational prescription. The patient, this is so fascinating. When I read this portion, I was quite fascinated. A patient's rights have been clearly emphasized there. A patient has a right to refuse a treatment if the physician cannot explain the rationale. Yukti bahyena beshajam. If there is no yukti in the prescription of the physician, that can be dismissed by the physician. So, asking a question whether Ayurveda is relevant is very much in tune with the spirit of Ayurvedic truths. In fact, the patient also has the right. This has been misunderstood. The physician's like a godly figure, and whatever he says should be blindly obeyed by the patient. All the nasty foods that a physician prescribes, and all the awesome awful medicines, the distasteful medicines that a physician prescribes have to be just, gulped down one's throat without any questioning. That's not the spirit that we see in Charaka Samhita. It's very patient-centric also. And Ayurveda does not call the patient as a patient, only in certain. He's a Purusha, he's a person. It's a person-centered approach. It's a Purusha, it's a Karma Purusha. You have to respect, you have to understand, and you have to reach out. It's a very person-centric approach. So in self-limiting diseases, patients get better without treatment. In incurable diseases, patients do not get better even without treatment. So if we need to, when you want to do a statistical assessment, we need to look at the natural course of the disease, the prognosis of the disease. And Vatraya tells, if in a patient who has a disease that is not self-limiting or which is not incurable, and even then if the best treatment fails, then you can say that Ayurveda doesn't work. Without doing that examination, don't dismiss that Ayurveda is useful. And he says that Ayurvedic physician is like an archer who takes aim at something which is within reach. And with the correct focus of the aim, knowing exactly what is needed to be done, when the arrow leaves, the prescription leaves the hands of the physician, it works unfailingly. Only in diseases that respond to treatment. The other two categories, no. So Ayurveda does not claim every disease can be cured. And Ayurveda does not claim that every disease requires a treatment. The physician, the Vaidya Prabhurayesha, the physician is only a facilitator of healing. When the body wants to heal, we can help. If the body says, we don't need you as a physician, we respectively stay away. And if the body says, you cannot make a difference, we don't intervene. That is the first thing that an Ayurveda physician has taught, to respect the biological system, to respect the prana, and be a facilitator, a pranabhisara. One of the terms which we used to call a physician as a pranabhisara, a friend of the prana of the individual. So it's very host-centric, person-centered facilitation. That is the healing. And this is what makes Ayurveda relevant today. Because those natural laws of self-healing, of host-centric approaches have not changed throughout the century. Modern medicine has enabled us to intervene, interfere. They may be helpful in controlling the situation to some extent. But when we look at medicine as healing, health as a process of self-healing and self-evolution, then the concepts of Ayurveda assume a lot of relevance and significance. So I'll come back to that again later. So the Charaka Samhita very clearly says that just because a physician treats a patient and the patients get better, that does not mean that the treatment has worked. So here he dismisses, he says, never claim that you cured a treated patient just because your treatment gave a positive result. So, Natra Vaidyaha Roga Pramokshe Karanam. Here the physician is not the cause. How can I accept it? So he says that any claims that are made by an Ayurvedic physician, without proper evidence and reasoning, it should be dismissed as a chance effect. Yadricha Siddhi. So this is a very interesting concept in Ayurveda, that if somebody says, I treated a patient, the first question is it Yadricha Siddhi? Did it happen by chance? So, without tarka, vina tarkena ya siddhi, yadricha siddhi revasa. If you cannot do a tarka and establish that there is a cause and effect relationship, it was only because of your treatment that the patient, got better, you would dismiss it as the yadricha siddhi. When the treatment well substantiated with rigorous observations and rationale, it is then accepted as a real effect. So there is a term for real effect, pratiniyamiki siddhi. This is evidence-based siddhi, result. So distinguishing between pratiniyamiki siddhi and adricha siddhi, chance effect and real effect of a treatment. This is another great lesson with the classical texts tell us, So what are the textbooks of Ayurveda? Here is a symbolic representation. So this is the spirit, this is the theme that you see in the classical text, and many, many such textbooks were written. So here is a map of India, and the different regional locations have just put some indicative books here. If I were to put all the books that are available, we wouldn't see the map of India. We had a very, very robust literary tradition of codification. Ayurveda was being continuously updated. Here are the time zones here. At every time zone, time chronological landmark period, there were new writings in the tradition of Ayurveda. And in every geographical region of our country was participating in this development of the knowledge tradition of Ayurveda. Many, many names, hundreds and thousands of names. It's not one or two persons. These are some of the major names that we are familiar with. Professor Muhlenbell, the historian of medicine from Netherlands, has written a book called History of Indian Medical Literature, which is by far the most comprehensive, collection of classical Ayurvedic literature. It's still not exhaustive in terms of, descriptions, but in terms of an outline, it has captured almost all the text. So he has an appendix where the great names associated with the Ayurvedic tradition are listed. So the number of people involved, the great personalities, are really mind-boggling. This is published in 5 volumes, by a publisher in Groningen, Netherlands. And this is a very monumental work, History of Indian Medical Literature. And there we can see the great names, the great tradition. Ayurveda was not built overnight. I mean, it has been the outcome of the sweat and toil of, thousands of great, ancient scientists who worked across the length and breadth of the country without a break in continuity across thousands of years. And that is what we have today as a legacy. And these texts are very structured. It's a technical writing. Ayurveda has a method of technical writing. It has to be very structured, Tantra Yukti. Just like we have a journal article formats. Different formats were there for writing texts of Ayurveda. Tantra Yuktis, it's seen in Arthashastra and Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, and most of the Tantra Yuktis are actually there in Ayurveda. Ayurveda perhaps was the first tradition to bring this rigor in technical writing. And peer review was there. If you write a textbook, it has to be read out before a group of peers, subject specialists as well as generalists. This we see. When Agnivesha wrote his book, he had to read it out before the whole. So they had a very big conference until the whole text was read and discussed. And the peer review committee agreed upon it. They said, now it can go into the world. Sumahad Yashasvi Dhira Purusha Sevitam, Aptajana Pujitam. So not only should it be peer reviewed, it should also be used. So peer review post publication status. That's so fascinating to me. So we have Bheda Samhita, Charaka Samhita, and Vagbhata tells why Bheda textbooks did not survive, because post publication utility was less. They couldn't survive. So only those which are used, Sevitam, which get used even after they become publicized, after they get accepted by a very strong peer review system, only they will survive. So only Charaka survived among the 6 texts that were peer reviewed and approved. Only Charaka Samhita got the highest post-publication reviews and use. The today's words we can say most cited, most used, most widely used Samhita was the Charaka Samhita. The rest got into disuse. We have Bheda Samhita in a mutilated form today. It couldn't be preserved because very few people used it. Nevertheless, it is very fascinating. There are many, many interesting descriptions in Bheda Samhita, who was a contemporary. Bheda was a contemporary of Agnivesha. He describes mind as being located in the Shiras. We don't find that reference in other books. Probably it was lost during editing and revising. We also have the idea of circulation, of blood coming back to the heart only in the Bheda Samhita. So even those books did not survive, they do hold a lot of interesting information, which perhaps indicate that this was there in the older Agnivesha's work. So a lot of knowledge was also lost. That is also a very, and here are some of the types. Samhitas are like systematic reviews. Samhita means compile, bringing everything together, restructuring. So today we know systematic reviews and meta-analysis form the, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing. I'm just seeing some parallels. The methodologies are different, but this is that whole idea that knowledge should be consensual also, especially when it comes to a practical science like medicine, where you cannot have every doctor doing whatever they want. There has to be some understanding, some commonality, and the best evidence has to be compiled. So that is a samhita. So Vagbhata Samhita is one of the biggest attempts at systematic review and meta-analysis. It's like the Cochrane review of Ayurveda, where all the existing literature was reviewed, and the essential things, the most reliable information was codified. Then you have monographs, lexicons, short like articles, original articles, and things like that. Many formats. Vyakhyas. Then you have commentaries. So it's almost like looking at a journal and seeing different formats for publication. Only things, these are not journals, they were actually books. And some of them were very dynamic, they kept getting updated. Some of them, so just like primary, secondary, tertiary literature, we can also classify this entire medical manuscripts. And the sad thing is, out of this whole medical manuscripts, less than 10% has been even read or transcribed or translated. 90% still languish in manuscript libraries. Although we can say that the core concepts and knowledge of Ayurveda has been retrieved, a lot would still be hiding, just like in circulation in Bela Samhita, respiration in Sharnadara Samhita. The knowledge of Ayurveda seems to have been scattered to various manuscripts. And the study of this 90% is something, as Indians, we value our heritage, even for historical reasons, even if we think it's not relevant for practice today, something that should be attempted. Because Ayurveda definitely deserves a better place in the medical history of the evolution of medicine in the world. So we have a transition from oral to written traditions. So Charaka, Sushruta, Kashyapa. Pediatrics is a new branch of specialty in modern medicine, hardly a few hundreds of years old. But Ayurveda had a branch of pediatrics in Kashyapa Samhita 3,000, more than 2,000 years ago, to be on the most conservative estimates. Because beyond the common era, before the common era, we don't know how far you can push Ayurveda. There are a lot of debates on how old Ayurveda was, with the Western scholarship always wanting to make it post-Greek, and the Indian scholars always want to make it pre-Greek, and they couldn't really arrive at a consensus yet. So I would always say, several centuries before the common era, because it doesn't matter that just because it is older, it is better. If it is more worthwhile, then it is better. Because Kalidasa says also, Purana Mityeva na sadhu sarvam. Just because something is old doesn't mean it's better. Tachapi kinchit navamitya vidyaman. Just because something is new doesn't mean it's useless. So why do we want to? Ayurveda does not get just glorified by making it older and older. Ayurveda gets accepted, or it gets appreciated when we show what is relevant in it. And so that's the whole approach. So, and that is the spirit of the tradition also. Now, my tryst with Ayurveda has also been not so nice in the beginning. I was forced to study Ayurveda when I just completed my matriculation. There was an experiment going on in Coimbatore, Ayurveda to be taught in a Gurukula style, and my father forced me to do this. I tried to resist, but I couldn't at that time, when obedience to your parents was, a value, much more than it is today. And I wanted to become a medical doctor, but I did this, and I thought of leaving the course thrice in the course of my study. The first time I was introduced to Vata Pitta Kapha, I got absolutely depressed. I thought my life is ruined after studying biology, physics, chemistry. The first time Ayurvedic concepts were introduced, that was absolutely disastrous. And they were translating bile, phlegm, wind. I thought that's the end of my life. What am I going to do with this primitive idea of what the human body is? So 3 times I won, and once my father did say, come back, then I rebelled. And then what I decided was, let my life, it was a very immature decision to think at that age, but I think the hormones got the better of me, and I thought it is also okay if I spend my life trying to disprove Ayurveda. So one of my greatest aspirations, which kept me going in the course, was try to disprove. Let this course be stopped in India. Let nobody else come and get into this kind of mental conflict. So even to disprove is okay. So many of us, some of us were also, Then we started studying modern anatomy and physiology. Where is the brain in Ayurveda? Where is all this detail? Where are the four chambers of the heart? We cannot see all these details in Ayurvedic text. How can we treat a patient? So first, when I studied the concept, second, when I got introduced to anatomy and physiology, I got very disillusioned. And then thirdly, when we started studying pharmacology, the precision science and the magic bullet idea from modern medicine, again, it was very depressing. But for some of the great teachers that I was exposed to, I don't think I would have survived the course or even, settled down with some satisfaction at this stage in my life that it was worth, studying Ayurveda. So I would like to narrate some of the just glimpses of what, brought me onto an appreciation of Ayurveda. Because this question, is Ayurveda relevant, was something that dawned to my mind in the very first years of my training. So here is the story of a neurologist. So when I just had almost finished my course, I met a traditional Ayurveda Nadi Vaidya, Dr. Raghavan, and I will show that video now in a moment. Let me just share that video for a moment. Yeah. So are you able to see the screen? I'll just make it full screen.
I'm seeing the screen, but when you shared your window, you should have enabled the sound also at the time. If the sound doesn't come, you can switch. You can now share the screen.
Okay.
But there will be an
look
option.
At the advanced sharing option.
No. Just on the main menu itself, there will be play system sound.
Okay.
Just enable
that. Audio.
No, in the share screen itself, when you share, there will be two check boxes.
Right. Yeah. Share sound. Fine. I got it.
Just select that and then select the windows.
Thank you. Right. Okay, so I am supposed to install an audio device. Are you able to hear me?
I can see the screen, but can you play it? And
Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's coming.
Okay.
The audio is coming.
So I'll just make it full screen. Yeah, I'll make it full screen in a moment. And also, just before that, I want to give a background. So here, a patient in a neurological ward of one of the most advanced hospitals in Kerala, Amrita Institute, was in a vegetative state due to a neurological disorder. The doctors were not able to revive that patient. He had a very chronic bed sore and that was not healing. So it was antibiotic resistant. 6 months, the doctors there tried all their best. They even imported some new generation antibiotics, but no response. The bed sore was becoming worse and worse. So there was so much of sloughing, pus coming out. The bones were beginning to be seen, and the doctors gave up. At this time, this doctor from whom I was trying to learn, Dr. Raghavan from Kerala, he took me. He said, "I'll show you something." I was having a lot of doubts and questions at that time. So he said, "I'll show you what Ayurveda can do." And he took me to this patient. And he arranged for a conversation with the neurologist who was treating this bed sore. And I will just play that conversation with the neurologist here. And this was one of the very earliest encounters that I had, which was a wow moment in my journey in learning Ayurveda. So let me just share that. Can you see the full screen now?
I am Dr. Hariprasad, neurologist working in Amrita Institute of Medical Science and Research Center, Kochi. I am going to tell about patient Mr. Ravindran. Mr. Ravindran is a 45-year-old man. He is suffering from a chronic neurodegenerative disorder. The exact diagnosis is still not clear. Initially, he presented with progressive cognitive decline, refractory seizures, and dystonia and chorea. And for the last 3 to 4 years, he is bedridden and almost in vegetative state. We have done extensive workup including the genetic screening like TNR sequencing, and still the diagnosis is not clear. But his seizures are fairly under control with anti-epileptics, and his movement disorders are also bilateral bed sore or both gluteal region, which is very extensive. And with this bed sore, he was admitted in our hospital primarily for the management of the same. And we have treated him with various antibiotics, depends on the cultural sensitivity. Many times we change the antibiotics, and yet the ulcer continues to grow in bigger size, and always there will be foul smelling discharge from the ulcer with a deep, thick, yellowish slough. Almost trying for 6 months, we lost hope for controlling this bed sore from our system of management, and the economic burden caused by the care of this bed sore was so enormous for the relatives. So patient was discharged from our primary care. He was seen by an Ayurvedic physician, and he started his own mode of treatment. And I am very frank to give my exact opinion that after his treatment, around about 1 to 1.5 months, the bed sore really started reducing in the size. Healthy granulation tissue has grown, the foul smelling discharges disappeared, and the yellowish slough also has gone. And now the width of the ulcer as well as the depth of the ulcer is significantly reduced. He has got 3 ulcers. The ulcer on the right side of the gluteal region is fairly under control, and there is no discharge, only healthy dry granulation tissue is there. It has significantly reduced in size, and the skin also actually started growing from the sides. There is no doubt about that. About that bigger ulcer, of course, previously there are a lot of discharges, pus used to ooze out from the very foul smelling pus. That has significantly come down, but it is not as healthy and dry as that ulcer on the right side.
I mean, normally, is this an expected outcome? I mean, medically, from the point of view of modern medicine, what would have been the prognosis?
Actually, from modern medicine, we consulted with general surgeons, and even they consulted with the plastic surgeons, and almost all of them opined that even a flap surgery is out of question here because of his extensive wound, and
skin transplant was out of the question.
Yeah. They said given the skin grafting is out of the question, because always when we do the cultural sensitivity, it is always used to be positive, and almost the bone is seen. All the sacral bones were seen. So they said
now that bones are not visible.
Yeah, bone is not visible now.
So normally, because there's always this attitude, that there are also conditions which might get cured by factors other than medicine. And Ayurvedic treatment most often gets dismissed as spontaneous remission.
That's true.
Or self-limiting. Would you say that this condition would fall under any of those categories?
As far as this wound is concerned, I am really surprised. I never expect that this much a remarkable difference will be. I am basically a person very much skeptical about Ayurvedic medicine. But after seeing this, I am really confused. That's what I'll say. I don't know what has happened. But
he has given only internal medication.
He has given only internal medicine.
There has been no dressing.
No dressing, nothing.
But are you continuing modern medications for that?
We are the basic dressing what we used to do in the hospital. We are doing like cleaning with a betadine and applying this metrogel gel and dressing. That's all.
So this is the this is also a So let me just close that window. Okay. So I hope the audio was it was audible. Yes. So here, what is very surprising was that today we are doing research on antimicrobial resistance, and even WHO is actually trying to look at traditional medicine for alternatives to antibiotics, because we are in the future I didn't realize at that time that I had come face to face with a problem that would become perhaps a very major challenge in the future, where surgeries also may not be possible if we have widespread antimicrobial resistance. Now, this is a big agenda world over. And I didn't realize at that time that I was beginning to see the seeds of a very potential area where Ayurveda could become relevant in the future. Where so now antibiotics can be activated by Ayurvedic medicine. Many such studies are happening. Even in our institute, we have taken up such studies. But what was interesting is the medicine that he gave. It was just some few herbs. And of course, there was also a metallic preparation, which is called, which is used in Siddha, and none of them were known to have any antibiotic activity. So whatever was given to that patient, not a single medicine was applied outside from Ayurvedic point of view. It was a host-centered approach. This is the first time I was actually encountering something which I had not even seen in my own clinical training. Somebody who was in the tradition, and this doctor had also studied MBBS. He studied Ayurveda traditionally. He studied MBBS, so that he has a better legal status. But he practices only Ayurveda, and he does the Nadi Chikitsa and all. So this was one of the first time. Another incident which happened was in an institute where I was working, where we got a chance again to face this challenge from skeptic people. So a journalist from the Washington Post, this is still accessible, India, a second opinion on the frontline world. This is from the Public Broadcasting Service of the United States. So at that time, this was certainly a couple of decades ago, when Ayurveda was just beginning to get popular in the US. I'll give you the link in a moment. When Ayurveda was getting popular in the US, so if you type frontline world, India, a second opinion, you will get the link actually. So here, T.R. Reid, who is a investigative journalist, he came. He was part of the team, with the PBS team. And he came to India. He wanted to do a good study because through PBS, they wanted to really inform the public what is there or what is not there in Ayurveda. So he went to many institutions and they had a particular demand. He said, I'm not an ordinary journalist. I'm not going to interview some people and write what you say. I'm going to do a real story because I have a problem. And I want to become a patient. We will pay for all the treatment. You do Ayurvedic treatment on me. And if I get better, I will say good things about Ayurveda. Otherwise, I will make sure that nobody in the US will think about Ayurveda. So this was the challenge that was put before us. And many institutions were hesitating. When he came to us, I got into contact with this person. And I got super excited. I thought it's a nice chance to test Ayurveda. So I discussed with my colleagues, and our medical director in Coimbatore, Dr. K.G. Ravindran, he was an extremely, skilled physician, very confident. And when I explained the problem to him, he said, please ask him what is his problem. Let's see what we can do. And then when I asked him, he said, my shoulder has gone to sleep since the last 25 years. I had an injury when I was in the military. I cannot lift. And modern doctors say that I need a prosthesis. And the doctor, you can see in the video, the doctor explaining what are all the complications that can possibly come out of it. So he has decided not to do that. She said, I'm offering myself to you, Ayurveda. And if you can make my shoulder move, then you got it. Then the US will hear some good things about Ayurveda. Otherwise, bad things. Are you ready for the challenge? So then we asked him, how many days do you have? He said, only 12 days. So then we asked him, do you think it is fair for a disease that you couldn't fix in 25 years and which modern medicine has nothing to offer? You want Ayurveda to cure it in 12 days? Is that even a fair thing to ask? He said, no, I of course understand. I'm not asking for such an unrealistic. If you can even make my hand move a little bit, I would be convinced that Ayurveda works. It's so stiff. So then we said, okay, please come over. And we did maybe even more treatment than I actually required because we thought let him also get a taste of what Ayurveda is. So some of the treatments were very awful for him. And you can see in his narration, at times cranky and sarcastic, Reid nevertheless admits that early mornings at the clinic are magical. And by the end of his stay, he discovers that he has less pain and more movement in the shoulder. In 25 years, for the first time, at the end of our treatment, He was able to comb his hair. He was able to lift his shoulder. So, uh, so he said after many months in his epilogue, he admits that whatever gains he made in India have faded away. His shoulder became stiff again, but that's not the fault of Ayurvedic medicine. He admits that's not. Let's be fair here. It's because I haven't done a damn thing about my arm since I left India. And he believes in his video narrative, he says, I came back with the feeling that if I had continued those treatments for a few more months, I would have definitely gained more function in my arm. So the acid test is something, when you see Ayurveda being put to that, when you see these kind of confrontations and when you see, the results coming, you realize that Ayurveda still has some place, in the modern world. So this is the link, and I got also another study opportunity. I'll come back to this slide. My interest in testing Ayurveda, the most difficult way, was still alive. And as if by providentially, we got this opportunity when I was in the previous institution. The National Institutes of Health funded us to do a study on Ayurveda, scientific evaluation of Ayurveda. So both of these things happened, with the US connection. So we had the University of California, Los Angeles, University of Washington, Seattle, and a very eminent rheumatologist, Daniel First, leading the whole study. And he came and he said, tell me what is the best medicine for rheumatoid arthritis, and we can do a trial. And we told him there is nothing like that in Ayurveda. Everything is good. Every patient, we need to give a personalized treatment. So we had a lot of arguments. They wanted a standard treatment. We said we cannot do that. Then finally he said, let me come down and see what you're doing. He came to our hospital all the way from the US, looked up all the patients, and he was surprised. He said, oh, you have RA patients who are not taking methotrexate, who are just surviving with Ayurveda alone. It looks like there's something going on here. So I'm open. Let's do the study the way you want it. So we insisted that we are going to give personalized treatment. So for the first time, a very unique study design was developed, where Ayurveda physicians could do individualized treatment, but we still had a randomized controlled trial design with blinding, with placebos. We developed placebos for kashayams, for Thailands, for all the Ayurvedic medicines using food additives that itself, and the blinding was successful. So we could fulfill the rigor that was demanded by modern scientists, and they were able to fulfill our demands that we needed to give the whole system holistic Ayurveda. And this study completed. To cut a long story short, we also made one insistence that we need to see the patients frequently. For that reason, every 2 weeks there was a patient visit, which is not usually there in the trial. And we said we need 1 year. Their studies complete in 6 months, but we, based on our experience, we said we need 1 year, but finally it was 9 months. So this was presented. We got an award from the European Society of Integrative Medicine, the first award for Ayurveda in Europe, when an effort was being taken in Europe to push Ayurveda by creating laws that were not Ayurveda friendly. At that time, we got the first recognition for Ayurveda in Europe by this study. And our paper got published in the #1 rheumatology journal in the world, Annals of Rheumatic Diseases. And that prompted one of the greatest skeptics of complementary and alternative medicine to approach us, Edzard Ernst. I've not seen such a cynical, criticizer of complementary and alternative medicine. He keeps telling we mustn't spend on CAM therapies because that is humbug. It's just placebo. He agrees that placebos are useful. So let allopathic practitioners use placebos. Let us not, nurture CAM practitioners for placebo effects. So when he saw our paper, he approached and said, I want to write a comment on your paper. And we thought he's going to again attack us. But Dr. First said, let's be open. I mean, this is science. So anybody can, if he criticizes, we can counteract. But we were surprised that for the first and last time in his whole career, he wrote something positive about complement and not. So it was, I think this is the kind of rigor that Ayurveda will need if we have to translate it. We have to take the debate to the opposition. It's easy for, the sympathizers of Ayurveda to pat us in our back. I mean, that's not going to help us develop. We need to face criticism. If we are able to confront people like Dr. Edzard Ernst, who is, such a vehement critic, And if we are able to make him see some sense there, then I think that is the ultimate test. So here he says much of alternative medicine is individualized and practitioners have to choose from many options. Ayurveda doesn't come as a single therapy. So Ayurveda doctors would want to give complex medicines. And so placebo controls and successful blinding are an obstacle, which is why modern doctors are not accepting. So he says the authors of this trial have demonstrated that this obstacle is surmountable. These results show that individualized treatments can be tested using an otherwise standard RCT design, and that blinding can be successful also. So he recommended our study as a blueprint for future studies of, complement and alternative medicine. So what we learned from this process was that criticism is not the problem. I mean, we need to engage in such debates. And that's the way we can see the relevance of Ayurveda, how we can make it relevant today. We can make it relevant even by subjecting it to the most rigorous methodologies of testing. Most of the time, Ayurveda community tries to shy away from these things, saying that we are time tested, so we don't need to test, or it's too complex to do. But why can't we engage in a dialogue? And then the results may sometimes be very encouraging, because we got the publication in the #1 impact journal, an award from the European Society. Our study was presented at the annual meeting of the American College of Rheumatology, and we also had one of the greatest critics recommending this as a model forward. So I think if we want to take Ayurveda forward into the future, we must be ready for such encounters. We must have a face-to-face, one-to-one encounter with the greatest skepticism and the greatest criticism, and we must address it point blank. I think that's the way we can move forward. And the results I want to show here. So, this made the whole difference, that we extended the study up to week 36, made the whole difference. If we had agreed to a 6-month study, the study would have ended by saying Ayurveda has no effect. Because at 6 months, Ayurveda group, the red bar, showed only 20% improvement mostly. Allopathic medicine showed highest improvement, 70% improvement at 6 months was only the allopathic group. But at the end of 9 months, the Ayurveda group had the best improvement. So between 6 months and 9 months, Ayurvedic medicines worked and fewer side effects. So you can hear now Dr. First telling the implications of the study. I will just share that screen.
It shows that there is a way to do classic full Ayurveda in placebo-controlled trials. And 2, it indicates that there's a chance that Ayurveda works just as well as standard therapy. We'll see what it comes out, but we're going to go on and try and get the funds to do the large trial.
So here this is a big statement from a world-renowned rheumatologist who's actually involved in, so let me close that screen. So this is kind of, I think, very important for us to take Ayurveda forward, because this is no ordinary rheumatologist. I mean, he is involved in the American College of Rheumatology team, which updates the criteria for diagnosis in modern rheumatology. I mean, he's involved in the development of ACR criteria for diagnosing rheumatoid arthritis, ACR-ULR criteria. So from such a person, he says that because this was a pilot study and now we are involved in the larger trial is going on now, and the next a year or so we will know what is the verdict. So he says there's a good chance that Ayurveda might be as effective as methotrexate in the management of rheumatoid arthritis, and that he's willing to do a larger study to find out. Now, this is something much more than we could expect as an outcome from a very rigorous scientific inquiry into the validity or the relevance of Ayurveda. So this is the link. Of course, I can also share the PDF of my presentation if you would like to access all the links. And there is another thing which I encountered was the French narrative. This is also available in this link, and this is a whole movie. I'm not going to show it, but you can, access the movie from the link, and I will share this PDF. So this is the story of a French oncologist who comes to India following his patient, whom he had dismissed as dead because of the metastasized breast cancer. So this lady here, the second image, was a, and this is the oncologist you can see in the first image, conversing with the healer in Kerala, to whom this French lady, breast cancer patient, came. So this lady got breast cancer and underwent treatment. And they said, we have removed your cancer and everything is fine. But at the review, the doctor had some bad news to break, saying, we are sorry, your cancer has spread and you don't have much to live. And that lady was very stubborn, very self-righteous individual, very strong. She just tore the hospital files in front of the doctor, threw it in his face and said, you have deceived me. I don't want your treatment anymore. I'm going. And then 2 years later, this lady turns up in the consultation room of this oncologist. And the oncologist's eyes literally pops out of his face. He said, you're still here. How did you survive? You should have been dead and gone by now. How did it happen? And then she said, I went to India. I did Ayurveda treatment and back. Now, these kind of encounters do happen in India. And I will show you one Indian oncologist also who took a similar step. But our doctors are very blind. I mean, they don't want to come out of their, protected, the four walls of their protecting their profession. They don't even bother to inquire. But this oncologist from France, just like the rheumatologist, most of the time when Westerners take interest in Ayurveda, we blame, saying they're coming here to steal our knowledge. It may be true, but there are also good people there. And in India, also there are good allopathic doctors and there are people who are very skeptical. So I think it's about the mindset. So it doesn't matter it's the West or the East. The factor is what mindset you have. So this doctor got so curious. He said, if there's something like this, the world should know. So please take me to that doctor who treated me. I want to know what's going on. This is unbelievable. So he's a very eminent neurologist from Paris. I mean, I think Toulon, I don't remember the exact location, from France. And so he came all the way and he did a, documentary. A very professional filmmaker did that. And in this journey, he narrates to the world that there are other relevant possibilities, relevant methods also in the world. Don't think that Western medicine is the only way. So while we need to create a framework to integrate other approaches, his key message is that he said, I'm not fully convinced, but I'm open. This experience has opened my mind to consider other approaches. So what happened was this lady got cured from this cancer through a combination of spiritual counseling and Ayurvedic treatments. So Thomas Tours, who had scoffed at her decision to try Ayurvedic medicine or look at alternatives, came back to India and did this. So this is something, these kind of things happen. In India also this is happening, but we are becoming blind. We are closing our eyes. In Kerala, the first medical oncologist from Kerala, Dr. C.P. Matthew, the former vice principal and head of oncology, Kottayam Medical College, has been treating cancer patients with Ayurveda and Siddha medicine since the last 30 years. Now, the Central Council, Ayush Ministry, and our institution, we are collaborating to document, and publish whatever he has done. He is cooperating. He had no reason to jump to Ayurveda. I mean, he had everything that he was a very well-renowned oncologist. One thing changed his life. One of his patients, again, who had very late-stage lung cancer and whom he said gave only a few weeks to live, came back after Siddha treatment, lived for 8 years. And that completely changed his outlook. He said, this is unbelievable. And he went and studied with Siddha Ayurveda physicians. He has a Siddha physicians appointed in his clinic, Ayurveda physician. And he's now treating cancer patients with Ayurveda. He also uses chemotherapy in some cases, but mostly with Ayurveda, Siddha, and alternative systems. So why are we not being open? I mean, no system is complete. Ayurveda gives us the strongest possibility of a host-centric approach, how to mobilize our body's own resources, to treat especially chronic diseases where host resources are extremely compromised. Diseases like cancer, diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. So closing our eyes to such possibilities is only inviting more misery in our lives. There is no doubt that modern medicine has advanced. There is no doubt that we have had new technologies And now we have many things under our control, but modern medicine has also left equally huge gaps, and also a lot of medicine induced problems which are actually had only added to our problems. Even today, the vaccination, Ayurveda can help us to tolerate the vaccine better. It's not Ayurveda versus vaccine. Inoculation first happened in India. Smallpox vaccination, mass vaccination was happening in India before vaccine was even there in Western medicine. So that idea Ayurveda is not against. But I think in modern India, we have failed to develop an integrative platform. I am a person who believes that we need to move forward. It's not going back to Ayurveda, but moving forward with Ayurveda and modern science. And for that, these interactions, encounters, and cooperation is very much necessary. So here is a young allopathic doctor. Here is also a link to this video. And the whole narrative is there. He's an allopathic doctor from an Ayurvedic family. He's studying surgery at Bangalore Medical College. And inside the ICU, he has been treating COVID-19 patients. And now the whole ICU, the whole department has given him freedom to treat critical COVID patients with Ayurveda. And here you can see, we had a webinar with him where he shared how SpO2 was improving with sublingual Ayurvedic medicines when the patient was going to be put on ECMO and all hopes were gone. Patients with lung fibrosis, recovering. For want of time, I'm just skipping this. In Charité Medical University in Germany, an Ayurveda study was done on what Ayurveda can do for osteoarthritis. And very interestingly, this study revealed that in 150 patients who received Ayurveda and standard of care, osteoarthritis, the patients responded better to Ayurvedic medicine. So some of the rheumatologists in one of the leading medical universities in Germany has done this study. Professor M.S. Veliathan did a lot of recent studies, initiatives on assessing and understanding Ayurveda. And his results have, given interesting outcomes. I won't say they are final because they are mostly preclinical, but they have given us interesting leads to pursue. So, Amalaki Rasayana, which is mentioned in Ayurveda, is good for anti-aging, neurodegeneration, preventing apoptosis, DNA repair, the non-toxicity of Ayurvedic, herbomineral preparations, correlation of Ayurvedic concept of Prakriti with genomic analysis. So M.S. Veliathan studies have really brought a platform where it looks meaningful for modern scientists, researchers, and Ayurveda clinicians to come together. So I think there is a great potential to discover the relevance of Ayurveda. Ayurveda says, so here is this coming in. This is, of course, not the best journal that Nature produces, but it's still part of the Nature group. Scientific reports where recently some papers have come from Ayurveda. So what is dead and what is living in Ayurveda? What is relevant? And how to translate what is living in Ayurveda for human benefit? How much time more do I have?
You can go ahead, sir.
Oh, yeah.
2 minutes, and then we can go to questions and answers.
Yeah, that's what. I'll just conclude in the next few minutes. So just to put a few more thoughts here and there about the approaches in Ayurveda. So Ayurveda says it has a three-tier structure. There is the tattva or the principle. There is the theory derived from these principles, theoretical constructs. The principle is the foundation, which is like the natural laws that don't change. The theory can change because it's a human interpretation of these natural laws. And then we have the practical applications. So Ayurveda has a three-tier structure. So Ayurveda says the vyavahara or the practice can change. The theory can be reformulated. It's only the principles that do not change. And Ayurveda is timeless at the level of tattva, but irrelevant. Theories can become irrelevant. Practices can become irrelevant. But the tattva remains relevant. That is how Ayurveda says it is timeless. And at the foundation, these principles can be reformulated. We can use modern science, modern knowledge. Ayurveda could give that framework in which we can rediscover many host-centric approaches, empowered by the principles of Ayurveda and the tools and possibilities of new discoveries for modern science. I think that's the way we need to go forward. The problem here is poor quality education. Ayurveda students are not taught Ayurveda. They're taught more modern medicine than Ayurveda. This is a big problem. and they try to mimic modern doctors. They want to practice allopathic medicine. They're not trying to create a space to practice Ayurveda. This is one of the biggest tragedies of modern Ayurvedic education. There is no lack of research. People say, I mean, there is lack of research. People say there's no research in Ayurveda. I ask, how do you do research? Where are the funds? 5% of the whole budget you give for the whole alternative system. And that within that a small fraction, and you say you must do world-class research. Where is modern medical research happening in modern medicine in India? All the research happens in the West. So we are not investing. Professor M.S. Valiathan rightly said, India, there is clinical medicine, there's no medical research. Knowledge is manufactured and imported from outside. And how can you expect Ayurveda to do research? Unless we invest in creating expertise, creating infrastructure, creating resources, investing money, creating the atmosphere and the kind of networking, collaborations. If we don't bring scientists, researchers, and Ayurveda clinicians together, we cannot have world-class research. It's a shame, I feel, that I had to do some of the best studies in collaboration with Western funding resources and universities. It should have happened in India. So another problem is clinical practice outcomes are not rigorously documented. People are making claims. Ayurveda clinicians, every case they treat, they will put before-after reports and publish on Facebook and WhatsApp. And this has become a widespread nuisance, especially after social media has become more prevalent. That's not the way to promote science. In Ayurveda, if there was WhatsApp or Facebook, I don't think Charaka or Sushruta would have recommended any transmission of knowledge through this media. You could reproduce, but the original writings had to go through a lot of rigor and scrutiny. So that's not the platform to share or make claims. Unfortunately, that's happening. It's out of desperation because somewhere there has to be an outlet. And when you cannot publish, when you cannot do good research, clinicians are forced sometimes to, get let loose of them. I mean, they just get loose on the social media. So in order to separate the grain from the chaff, this questioning has to continue. Is Ayurveda relevant? But let it be constructive criticism with an open mind. Then we can make some progress. And I am myself an example of somebody who started with criticism. It became constructive in the long run. And today I feel there's a lot that Ayurveda can offer, not in opposition to modern medicine. It's not here to replace or drive away modern medicine, but to create an integrative framework where people have more options, more opportunities. We don't create a healthcare system that, because of power politics between medical systems, leaves the general public with a lot of unmet needs. That is a crime. You cannot leave the general public with a lot of unmet needs. We need to address unmet needs. And for this, multiculturalism, multiple approaches to knowledge building, pluralism of knowledge systems, pluralism of healthcare systems, this needs to be definitely encouraged. So as the text says, Etad Brahma Bhashadam Brahma Jova Ka Nirmandre Vakta Vedokti. Let Brahma or his son make the statement, doesn't matter. As long as it is a fact, it is a fact. This is what Vagbhata tells us. And he says also that it does not matter whether the Rishi say or a non-Rishi says it. We cannot accept a wrong statement even from a Rishi. It has to be Rishi Pranide Pridishched Muktva Charaga Sushrudau Bhedadya Kimna Pathyande Tasmad Grahyam Subhashidam. Accept only the Subhashidas. Don't try to find out who said it or on what authority it becomes acceptable. So this is the spirit of the tradition. The spirit of Ayurvedic tradition is very much in confirmation with the most rigorous scientific temper that we have today. But Ayurveda is an evolving, adapting system. It is our heritage, it is our legacy, and it has a role to play, I think, in global healthcare in the future as part of a larger frame of integrative approach to health. And I hope we can explore that. There are many other slides where I wanted to explain the research methodology in Ayurveda, but I think that would be too much for this. We could explore that, maybe if people are interested in another stage. I would like to conclude with a very famous statement from Charaka Samhita. Pariksha karino hi kushala bhavanti. If you want to become successful, you must investigate into the truth of the things. If you don't do that investigation, if you don't try to separate what is falsehood from what is truth, then you fail. And that's the edifice. That is the strength of the tradition of Ayurveda has been built, and we need to live up to this tradition by continuing the same, Rida. Thank you very much for this opportunity and to, just give a glimpse of what Ayurveda is in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rammanohar. That was quite an interesting presentation. There are plenty of questions, but I want to start off with one of my own question in this. Why do you say that even today, a lot of if you ask our students who would like to become doctors, they choose the allopathic Western medicine, right? Is it only because it has more? So I mean, let's connect it to your own early view when you heard about Vata Pitta Kapha and the shock that you had. So can you just combine the two? I mean, what was it that was causing you that
Yes,
that discomfort?
Yeah, I think a lot of social perception, my educational background, where I was led to believe that, medicine had evolved and we had put behind everything that is ancient. And at that time, I had not even heard about Ayurveda until my father told me. We used to see some herbal people cutting medicines, and I used to look at them as, very pitiably, these poor people, they're still chopping herbs while medicine has evolved so much. So the whole idea that's ingrained in our education system, probably it's a colonial influence. And I was involved with the CBSE in creating an optional course, elective course in, Indian knowledge systems. We have not been, there's definitely a lot of things that have become outdated, but in our textbooks, our school education doesn't give us a foundation to respect our own traditions or to generate that interest in youngsters, to explore our own traditions in a healthy way. We shouldn't go to the other extreme, also being worshipful of the tradition. We need to take it at its face value. There is something relevant, and as inheritors of this tradition, it's also a responsibility of a lot of the younger generation to take up the study, make it more relevant and contemporary. That message is never conveyed.
Okay. No, I have a slightly different view here. Would you not agree that in the last, say, 300 years or 400 years, the allopathy or the Western medicine, irrespective of the reasons, I mean, that they had more money or whatever the reasons are, step by step, they have actually pictured and created, the human body, what is there inside, what ails it, anything to do with germ theories, how to protect us from microbes, the diagnostic processes, the stethoscope, you name it, it's not a dramatic package that that particular system of medicine had developed, which is today what has made it #1 medicinal system. I mean, just as a as a practitioner of Ayurveda, how do you look at that?
I am myself I'm very much fascinated by all the medical knowledge because I learned up,
Right.
I went through this whole process. So that's definitely there. That is also the reason. That is the perception that we get. That is well known. That's what I was trying to point out. And we cannot deny that. Medicine has definitely made great strides and advancements. But if you look at the whole ontological framework of what we can know, it is the physical structures, the external structures of the body, how we can visualize under the microscope. If you look at the human being in a much more complex way, the deeper dimensions, what the famous biologist Alexis Carrel said, man the unknown. Because modern medicine has created this illusion that what is more visible to our senses by revealing more details about it, we have come to the point of even thinking that there is nothing beyond that. And so this has led to this new crisis of creating this unknown, even the feeling that we don't need to explore beyond what is visible to the sense organs. The epistemology of Ayurveda begins, the ontology of Ayurveda tells us, pratyaksham alpam analpam ya pratyaksham, what can be seen. Even if you magnify, even if you go into the details, that's not reality. There is something beyond it. And that is what I think, that is why these two systems become complementary. We have learned, the overemphasis on the interior, on the internal personality of mind-body medicine, which is now beginning to emerge in Western science also. Now it is taking a whole, turnaround. But this, I always consider it as a zoom out and zoom in view. That's how I present Ayurveda and Western medicine. If you want to zoom in, then you get modern medicine. So we have these two, mutually complementary views now. This was not possible earlier. So in diagnostics, for example, it becomes much more easier now for an Ayurvedic physician if he's going to use modern diagnostics tools to report outcomes, to understand diseases, even use Ayurvedic theories in a much more, accurate manner. So definitely, I don't see this as contradictory. The only challenge is that if you think that this advancement, because human nature is very complex, just because we understand one area more doesn't mean that the other area should be completely ignored. So Ayurveda is definitely weak. This is the conflict I felt when I studied anatomy and physiology, because such detailed descriptions, such detailed accounts of histology, each cell you can see under the microscope, stain it, with such detail, you don't see it in Ayurveda. But the thing is, the body is so complex system that the way it is organized, these sum of the parts, Ayurveda says, nahi jnanavayavena kritsne jneye jnanam utpadyade. That is one of the major principles in Ayurveda. The whole is more than the sum of its parts. So by breaking down something into its parts and seeing all the details, you don't understand the whole. That whole organizational framework, which is what Ayurveda talks about as the three doshas. They are the self-regulatory frameworks. They are not three things. So that is what I think. So this can be brought into this monoculture idea that this is what has happened as a problem. One culture, one way of knowing. When it comes to other like art forms, there can be Indian music, there can be Western music. But in science, there is only Western science, and everybody has to think only in that way. In the terms of knowledge alone, we have got stuck into this mono culture. So that is all I am talking about. There is no question that many Ayurveda physicians criticize modern science, and that is wrong. I don't believe in that. What I believe is that all these things put together gives us a more complete knowledge. And knowledge is not that we are going always from ignorance to better knowledge. It's also circular. Sometimes we go in one direction, then come back, then we go forward. So whatever is that is ancient is not automatically primitive. And whatever is, so it's not a very clear linear progression. It's been circular, zigzag. It's much more complex because many things. Yeah, I'm sorry. So I think it's
I will come back to this because there are plenty of other questions which I think can make your answers will make things a lot clearer for a lot of us. There's some questions from Krishna Narayanan which goes to the very fundamental thing, which is, can you briefly talk about the basic tenets of Ayurveda? What defines Ayurveda and how it distinguishes itself from other systems of medicine? Yeah,
in Ayurveda, it doesn't try to distinguish it. That's one thing. It's inclusive. There is a saying in Vedanta that Swasiddhanta Vyavasthasu Dvaidino Dridha Nischita. The Dvaidis are very established in their own principles. They want to distinguish themselves from others. Parasparam Viruddhyande. They want to negate something else and show that how they are different. Tair ayamna viruddhyate. We are not here to contradict. We are here to accommodate. And Ayurveda is one. So in Charaka Samhita, we have a statement, Vividhani hi shastrani bishajam pracharanti loge. There are so many sciences of the physicians in the world. How do we collect a criteria? How to create a framework to incorporate all of them? This is what Ayurveda has been trying to do. So I will tell you what is it that Ayurveda defines itself. First and foremost, it is nature-centric. It says that no health is possible. We are part of nature. So take care of nature if you want to be healthy. After that only we can do any medicine or any individual. It's not, many people say Ayurveda is person-centric. We say that would be disastrous. The person is dependent on nature. Purushoyam Loka Samhita, the individual, the microcosm, is just an epitome of the macrocosm. So first, make sure your environment is healthy. Without that, you cannot be healthy. You are existing because of nature. So a nature-centric approach, Ayurveda says health and disease is just an outcome of your interaction with your external environment. So pandemics, unhealthy air, water, all these things are discussed. So first is it's nature-centric. And the health culture is, in nature centric, we say that for people living in a particular locality, we need to customize. They should have their own foods, their own. So Ayurveda, global Ayurveda doesn't mean everybody in the world eating dal and roti and curd rice. I mean, that is not the Ayurvedic vision of globalization. What is needed for them in that place, that is what should be used. So it is a global localization. Second thing, that it is person-centered. Every individual is unique, just like our fingerprint. So Ayurveda is based on the premise that if a treatment works for one person, it need not work for another person. Modern medicine, the whole idea is what works for one individual works for the whole population. So we need trials where n is equal to 1. And that's also possible today. Whereas in modern medicine, we need n is equal to infinity is the better trial. Whereas here n is equal to 1 is the more rigorous trial, because no two individuals are identical. So Ayurveda has an exclusively person-dependent approach. Third thing is Ayurveda talks about mind-body relations. It says mind and body makes one continuum. In fact, the modern idea of PNEI axis is like a rediscovery of the Ayurvedic concept of Manas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Manas representing mind, Vata representing the neurological system, Pitta the endocrinological system, and Kapha the immunological system. So psycho, neuro, endocrino, immunology. This is the axis that Ayurveda presents before us. And there is a continuous crosstalk between your mind and your body and these regulatory systems. Because immunology, endocrinology, and neurology are the regulatory systems. And what pradoshas represent the self-regulation of the body. And there is a constant crosstalk across these systems. And what happens in the body affects the mind. What happens in the mind affects the body. And so you cannot treat the body alone or the mind alone. This psychosomatic approach is very unique. When the body is sick, we treat the mind. And when the mind is sick, we treat the body. Because you can approach. So we say, taptajya ghadayor, if you pour hot ghee into an iron vessel, it will become hot. If you heat an iron vessel in which ghee is there, the ghee will also get heated. That is how the body and mind is. The next thing is, Ayurveda says medicine is only an addition. Counseling, lifestyle, and diet is like flowing the body, creating the conditions for healing. And medicine is an add-on. So we don't want medicines alone to work. In fact, we say you will need more medicines if you use less diet and lifestyle. I developed some problems recently, pre-diabetic, because of my research and desk work. And what I found when I did some research is the most modern findings are that hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, all these modern problems of diabetes are best managed by diet and lifestyle. You can cure them only with diet and lifestyle. There was a direct trial conducted in Europe recently on diabetes. And they found that by weight management and diet, even 6-year-old diabetic patients can come back to remission. Whereas if you start medication, you will become a permanent diabetic. Same with the hypertension. In the early stage, now there is an approach called DASH, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This is what is recommended by the American Heart Association. You can bring down diastolic, systolic pressure without the need for any medication. So similarly, high intensity interval training, for improving your heart function, improving your blood pressure. This is now the latest finding is that if you use a device and breathe, do inspiration training, muscle training, you can reduce blood pressure much more than aerobic exercises. I was reminded of yogis sitting and controlling their breath without these external devices. So a lot of these things, Ayurveda is not medicine, or medicine we say is a failure. If you have to use medicine, it means you have already committed a lot of errors. Now you are getting help from outside. So that's the last choice in Ayurveda. But today we are imitating modern medicine. And another thing is we say medicines can be got from anything under the sun. Plant, animal, mineral, shit, food, everything. Cow's urine is not something holy for Ayurveda because we kill cow and eat meat also. So there's nothing holy about it. If there is some compound in that, we are willing to look at it. Anything under the sun, it doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's biologically active, Ayurveda is willing to use it. Then Ayurveda's emphasis on healthy aging and natural death. Ayurveda says if you cannot, 100 years, longevity, life expectancy is very critical. Not only health lifespan, but also health span. If all these things in a nutshell, is what characterizes Ayurveda. And I think this is a very beautiful vision for the future. And last point I would like to make, I'm sorry, because that completes it. When I was a student, the WHO came up with the slogan, Health for All by 2000 AD. And in 2000, I had completed my course. And I realized that's the time around the time when AIDS came. And so there was no health for all. In fact, it was a big disaster. And then WHO revised, saying universal healthcare. That is now their slogan. But Ayurveda has told so many thousands of years ago, the only thing we can promote is health intelligence for all. What we need is health intelligence. That is the only way people can be made healthy. Health is not something which can be distributed as a commodity. You can give the best healthcare in the COVID pandemic time. We found countries with access to the most advanced healthcare reeled in the first wave of the pandemic. So universal healthcare is not enough. It is only when that is what the pandemic is also teaching us. We need health intelligence. We are losing health intelligence. We are looking for quick fix solutions. So in that way, that is the message of Ayurveda. And I say this is not what distinguishes Ayurveda, but this is what allows Ayurveda to accept all approaches. And it says that not only Yukti Vyapasana, rational healing, we should look at spiritual, religious approaches also, because sometimes it helps the patient. Even you may not believe in it, you must look at the religious background. If a ritual is going to help a patient heal, Ayurveda is okay with that. It doesn't bring science in the wrong place. The personal belief system of the patient is important. So this is very all-encompassing. We are not against any medical system. Try to incorporate as much approaches as available to create a more complete healthcare system. Sorry for that long answer.
No, this that's the base. There are plenty of questions, and some are let me just jumble them around. So there's a question from Shantala, which is some diseases are, and these are her views. Some diseases are best treated by allopathy than Ayurveda, and vice versa. How does the respective physician do justice when a patient approaches? Isn't knowledge of both systems mandatory? And this is what she says. I mean, what is your view, and how is it seen overall?
Right. First of all, every medical doctor should have a basic training. Our healthcare education has to change. We need a common platform where you have a basic medical practitioner, and then we must specialize in different areas. That is what I think is ideal medical. Because in India, what we are doing is, legally we are sanctioning the study and practice of different medical systems, and there is no facilitation. There was a paper in which they said in India we have coexistence, but no cooperation between medical systems. In fact, coexistence means more conflict. This is the irony, and the common man suffers. So everybody should have a respect for all systems, and then you must have a common, that at the basic level, that is what this disparity that we have. I'm an allopathic doctor, so I'm more like entitled. It's not correct in this modern era. You must have a basic medical practitioner to whom a patient can go with the confidence that he's capable of advising you the best possible option. So that should be the basic medical training, not in any particular medical system. So you have a basic doctor who is able to use the best resources available and give the basic care. And then he should say, oh, here a Panchakarma treatment is good. You go to a specialist who has also done the basic training, but now he has specialized in that system of medicine. And allopathy should also be one such specialization. The basic stream should have a synthetic, this is my personal opinion. And in India, the Niti Aayog has come up with one nation, one health, concept. I was part of this working groups and task force working groups also, where an effort is being made to slowly bring about a change, where now modern doctors should also study about Ayush systems. They must be posted in Ayush hospitals so that they not to practice, so that they know what that is.
But that is going to be. Sir, that's where the problem comes. I mean, look at your own indigenous Indian tradition. Besides Ayurveda, we have been talking about Siddha, which particularly from Tamil Nadu and has been there for quite a long time. Then you have Unani that has come into this country, and much later now you have in the last 200-year-old homeopathy, and in a sense, they are put together as one block, right? And I don't know, otherwise I would have asked you certain pointed questions about homeopathy itself, but I don't want to get into such controversies right now. how is it possible for someone to keep getting to know about all of this? And to the extent, do you, for example, in your Ayurvedic programs, teach about other systems and not the modern medicine, but about Siddha or about Unani, for example?
Yeah, we don't really focus on, because yoga is there in Ayurveda, but not the other systems. So that is also being discussed now. In fact, when this is something I have always been pointing out, that integration in India, we always take it between Ayurveda and, between Western medicine and some Ayush system. There has to be, first of all, an integration within Ayush systems. Because now we are having another NHSRC initiative where we are trying to figure out how to bring a Ayush integration into the framework. Now, there is a political representation from, it's becoming more of politics than science, because every system wants to assert their presence. And at the end, you have to, exercise diplomacy rather than science to solve the problem. So this is going to be a very major challenge. So we may have to start with, in India now, Ayurveda is widespread. And there has to be also personal choices of the patients till we reach a stage. And we have to encourage systems to converse with each other, do studies, comparative effectiveness studies. We have to completely change the research ecosystem before we'll have enough knowledge. Because I don't want to be judgmental. I cannot say that Ayurveda should be the base, or a homeopath will say that no, we should be the base. Western medicine is already telling that best practices should be integrated. We are the base. So this is not going to go. This is not going to. So we need a very democratic, healthy ecosystem where research is done, comparative efficacy studies are done, and we gradually build up evidence. Till that time, people should be given a choice. We should give whatever evidence is available and leave it to the patient to take an informed decision. So this is what.
Yeah, Doctor, the problem there is that there's a lot of quackery that is around as well. Right? You're talking about Ayurveda as a knowledge system, and we have documents, history, evidence, everything. But when the moment you start talking about, general naturopathy, and again, I'm loath to pull in many names. All kinds of things are passed off as medicines,
Right,
with wild claims which you yourself mentioned during this talk. Then some kind of regulation is required, right? The moment we are talking about people's lives, and when something goes wrong, then everybody will go and criticize the government. So what is the level to which you would say personal choice, mandatory regulations, checking, verification, is quackery one of it? So it's a very difficult area to navigate, right? So how do we deal with this then?
Yeah. So that is true with modern medicine also. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
You can continue.
So, see, this quackery and things are there. I can say even during the pandemic, there has been a lot of wrong prescriptions and practices by established modern doctors. So that has to be dealt with at another level. There has to be more regulation. Why it is happening in traditional systems is strong regulations are not in place. In modern medicine, the level of regulation is different across the world. There are some countries where it is very well regulated, like in the US. Also, a lot of official, or what you can say, legalized quackery is happening. Within the system, there are a lot of wrong practices, but they are more vigilant. These are being identified, and then you expose. So you cannot get away with it. But in India, even a modern allopathic doctor can get away with wrong practices that don't conform, to their own standards. So in Ayurveda, it is even worse because we have less regulations. So we need to regulate these systems, first of all. More proper regulations have to come in. Each system should be put under pressure to come up with the best evidence that they have to offer. And then the public and, the administrative system should be given the choice of choosing what is available according to their preferences. If somebody says, I know what modern medicine can give, I know what Ayurveda can give, but at this stage of my life, I would like to choose Ayurveda. Just like the journalist said, I understood what modern medicine can offer. They said these are the problems. Ayurveda should also be asked to tell what they can do, what are the unwanted effects, they should also be able to, at least at the beginning, it's not possible to cross integrate. If every system can define what they can do, as Charaka tells in his Samhita that, you cannot treat everything. This is the outcome. So we know where we can, help. And as long as we confine to that area, then the public should be able to be given the choice of choosing, which system, but it should be informed. Not today's, when quackery or when you don't have regulation, each system can lure the public, misinform them,
Right.
force them into take. That is why I think what you were mentioning.
Yes.
So they're only, and already Ministry of Ayush is doing a lot of work. During this pandemic, the Magical Remedy Acts was enforced and severe action was taken against people who made false claims.
Right.
We created committees where any claim had to be first, scrutinized by a team of experts before, they could make it. So these efforts should be strengthened. That's what I think.
So question from Shashwat. Is there any documentation of how practice evolved over time? Were there any updates of fundamental ideas post interaction with other systems, like say with Chinese or with Unani systems?
Yeah, definitely there is a historical proof that Chinese scholars came to India, and people have speculated about certain techniques that we see in Ayurveda, like pulse diagnosis, which you don't see in classical textbooks like Charaka or Sushruta. This just comes, all of a sudden in later 13th century textbooks. Where did this nadi come from? But a Chinese system has it, right from the beginning. So, and in the Siddha system, we see the nadi. So there are so many speculations, and I am personally not interested in racial superiority or, I'm interested in what is relevant. So it doesn't matter. Maybe through the China-Tamil Nadu connections, the Nadi system came to Siddha system first, because Siddha system has it right from the beginning. Ayurveda has it much later. So it could have been something which Ayurveda incorporated from Siddha. Similarly, the Marma tradition, in Ayurveda, which has some similarity to the acupuncture system in Chinese medicine, there seems to have been some, either they're totally independent but it's very likely that there has been influence. But Chinese, if it has been taken from Ayurveda, Chinese has developed it much more. So maybe much more. No, not earlier, much more. Not early. Because they developed a system for Marma manipulation, whereas in Ayurveda, it was only points to be avoided in surgery. In the classical text, we don't have Marma manipulation, no point stimulation. That idea came from acupuncture. So maybe some practices Chinese took from Ayurveda and developed further. Some Ayurveda may have taken. But that, unless we do more historical studies, I don't know also, apart from a historical thing, why it is very relevant. Ultimately, what do we gain by proving from where it came in such a difficult way? I would leave it with current evidence. There's still scope for speculation. But clearly, there has been exchanges between Greek medicine, Ayurveda, between Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, between Unani medicine itself is a combination of Ayurveda and Islamic medicine. Islamic medicine derived from Greek medicine.
Greek medicine, yeah.
Greek medicine, because Yavana is coming from Unani Yavana, which is from Greek.
Okay. There is a very interesting question from Arvind Iyer. Are there statements in Ayurveda text acknowledging that the knowledge, there is models and findings in the text, are provisional and will eventually be replaced by improved models or disproved by new findings? How do you see, let me just finish. There are two more things added to that. How do you now see the Vata, Pitta, Kapha model compared to when you saw it in the class? Do you think it is only of historical interest as a crude model, or may it suffice for some present day applications? In the Maitreya Atreya Samvada or elsewhere in Ayurveda texts, are there any references to the placebo effect in particular, or the effect of a patient's mental state on treatment outcomes in general? There are quite a few questions together. I'm just presenting all of them to you.
If by the time I explain, if I miss something, you can please remind me.
Sure, I will do that. I will do that.
So the first question about advancement of knowledge. In Charaka Samhita, in an anatomy passage, it is mentioned that Ataparam Tarkyameva, I'm not sure further what it is. You have to actually, study and improvise and make it more accurate. Certain treatments, when it is mentioned, it is said Siddha, Siddhatara, Siddhatama. This is Siddha good, but there could be Siddha Tara or Siddha Tama, even better. So that needs to be evolved. And the physician is told, don't follow what is in the text. Anukta Grahyam. This is what the student is told. What is mentioned here is only for the low intelligent people. Alpa buddhinam vyavaharartham, for the less intelligent who cannot explore further or update on new knowledge, this is enough. But swanumana yukti kushalanam anuktartha jnanaya means you are expected to discover more than what is there in the text. So the text says, even when I have given these instructions, don't follow it. You will fail if you blindly follow the text. Dishanaya sheshamapi swayamuheda buddhiman. You find out yourself. Na shastra matra sharano. Don't be dependent on the shastra. Na cha analochidagama. Don't blindly believe what is there in the text. Move forward. Subuddhevam sahasrani kotirvapi vikalpayet. With your own intelligence, make hundreds and crores of formulations. The text is not the limit. So that is very, very clearly mentioned. So many statements are there in the text prompting us to, move further. And many new theories of nutrition. The commentators have proposed new theories of nutrition. There have been debates. Now Chakrapani is telling if Rasa Dhatu is converting into Rakta Dhatu, then 3 days of fasting we would be left without any Rasa Dhatu. So he's using an empirical evidence that Rasa Dhatu is the nutritional food nutrition. So there is a theory that one tissue transforms to the other. And Chakrapani, one of the commentators, questioning this by saying it is not matching observation. Because in 2-3 days fasting, we would have no body fluid. We would completely die and it doesn't happen.
Right.
So our body is always preserving, a basic until we really get completely dehydrated. So these kind of theories, discussions show, but still there is a tendency in the texts to revere. That is where modern medicine and Ayurveda are different. Somebody I saw also asked about reductionism. I'm not saying, there is reductionism within a holistic framework and holism within a reductionistic framework. There is holism and reductionism in both systems. So I'm not going to label anything as holistic or reductionistic. But Ayurveda tries to get the bigger view and modern medicine predominantly tries to. So one is moving from reductionism to holism.
Right.
The other is trying to move from holism to reductionism. So once you fix on one platform, it's difficult to, completely get the other perspective. So that is the limitation. Now, so I think, I just lost. I was explaining about.
So in a sense, what you are saying is that inherent in the text is that things can be improved. That it is not set in stone, and there are new methods that can be developed, new medicines can be developed, new approaches to addressing a particular problem can always be figured out at any given point in time. Yes. Plus the fact that it is so personal to an individual, and every individual is obviously a new individual tomorrow. So what you did, the food is changing, the individual is changing, the environment is changing. So naturally, therefore, the treatment approach based on a certain set of principles will have to be changed.
Yes.
Okay.
So now the thing is, this brings to a related question. I'm just jumbling the questions. Yeah. What I feel about Tridosha theory. Tridosha theory was also challenged within the Ayurvedic tradition. There was a proposition of a fourth dosha, whether a dosha really exists. So it is not that tradition has always been questioning all these concepts. And as I said, as long as we get answers that this is valid, the theory survives. And in Ayurveda and modern medicine, it's more, you build the data first and then construct theory. In Ayurveda, we have a platform first, and that is what has made it a little stable. So there are advantages and disadvantages in both these approaches. In modern medicine, sometimes everything gets changed, completely changed overnight, and you have a completely new platform. In Ayurveda, it may not happen that way. That I must say it's a limitation. And that's also his strength because it has a little bit more solid foundations. It takes longer time for things to change. That's how it has been. So that we have to accept as one of the limitations, but it also gives us some other advantages. And the Tridosha theory we still accept because even when we study very critically, we examine it. If it is valid and useful, then only we are obliged to believe in it.
Right.
If it is clinically still useful, we can accept it. If it is not useful, as Adi Shankara says, Nishchita Phalavad Vijnanotpadagatvam Vakya Pramanya Lakshana. If it is practically useful, if it is being able to Nishchita Phalavat Vijnanotpadagatvam, which results in a tangible outcome. If that statement is leading to a outcome that is tangible in your actual transaction, then tad yatra asti tat pramana. That is the criteria for pramana of a vakya.
Okay.
So as long as Tridosha theory helps us to treat, which is still helping me to treat, I find the Tridosha classification is the key to choosing medicines and effective, things. Did I miss some other question?
No, there is, but I will skip because we are coming to nearly the end. So I want to ask just 2-3 more questions, which I think are fairly important. So one is again from Shashwat. Says the statement about individualized medicine reminds me. What is your opinion of over-the-counter Ayurvedic medicines available in the market?
Yeah, over-the-counter is there in Ayurveda and modern medicine also. Again, I tell
but modern medicine's approach is that, which is like, one will more or less solve the problem for everybody. Maybe there are a few exceptions.
Yeah, so in that I will come to it. See, when Ayurveda says individualized, it doesn't mean what is the magic of life is that we are all made of the same ingredients. So we are also similar at one time, but still we are different. So the configuration is the only difference. If you break down all of us, we get the same carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen atoms. There is nothing different. So Ayurveda tells we are same and different at the same time. So certain things can be used commonly. So where to use, where not to use. So in all our prescriptions for any disease, you will find there are some common medicines which we do give to all the patients. So in certain contexts, certain situations, in certain regions, now I wouldn't say that we can have a product that could be universally marketed all over the world. But maybe in Kerala, in one region, we can have some common approaches for the people living there. There we could have some easy over-the-counter things, because people cannot always customize. Ayurveda understood that. Then we would spend our whole life, making formulas and figuring out how. So certain things come as, because we are also common, because our body has a common physiology. But within that background, we need to also customize. So all Ayurvedic prescriptions would include some advices that are common and some advices that are specific. But this modern OTC products, in my opinion, are mimicking the Western approach. They are not based on this philosophy. So, they are kind of herbal. Many Ayurveda clinicians would dismiss them as not Ayurvedic, but as a new form of herbalism.
Right.
Where, you are saying for hypercholesterolemia, one Ayurvedic product. For, sleep, one product.
Right.
This is definitely not Ayurveda.
Okay.
This is definitely
great.
Not
Yeah, that's a point that I wanted to
but
hear
I
from.
Wouldn't totally dismiss common approaches.
I understand that point also. And this is really important now with COVID pandemic. So Shantala wanted to know what sort of approach went into attempting a cure for COVID by Ayurvedic method. Also, what research is happening for addressing cure for modern diseases that may not have been listed in the text. But I would want you to focus on the first part of it, if you can, given the time possibly.
Yeah. See,
and just let me just add, and the talk about Andhra-based doctor claiming a cure. I don't know whether it is Ayurvedic or otherwise, and the buzz around it in the papers, and it's a huge queue. And then the whole thing subsided with all the conspiracy theories where people saying that, here is a guy willing to give it for absolutely for free, and the government is not taking that. So in the light of all of this, how did Ayurveda as a platform or as a concept approach COVID, and you particularly, your group of researchers?
Yeah, I will just show you also an article which we published at the very beginning of the pandemic. I have myself published about 5-6 papers, and more work is going on. I'll just share my screen.
Sure.
So this paper, which is published in the Journal of Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine, it's a Scopus Index journal. Although it is an Ayurvedic journal, that's quite a peer review that is happening. So this was published actually, in June last year, and we had worked on it at the beginning of the first wave. where we are trying to give an Ayurvedic clinical profile of COVID-19. How do we understand the new disease from an Ayurvedic perspective? And this is very elaborate. We worked with allopathic doctors in Medanta Hospital. So you can see Naresh Trahan, Kuldeep Kumar, Manish Kumar Singh, Pooja Sharma. They are all from Medanta Hospital, where they shared with us data of a pool of patients they were treating at that time. That was the beginning of the pandemic. And we did a triangulated approach. We looked at the clinical symptoms of the patients. We looked at modern literature reporting COVID clinical manifestation, and we looked at classical Ayurvedic texts. And on this basis, we tried to explain what is COVID-19 from an Ayurvedic perspective. So what are the typical symptoms that we see in modern medicine? This is which are the symptoms? How do they match with certain Ayurvedic categories? How would we classify the system? So we listed about 55 symptoms that were reported, related to COVID. And we found out based on that how we could do an Ayurvedic assessment and arrive at a conclusion. So this is our assessment. Type of disease, Sankramik or contagious, communicable, impact of disease, Janabadodhamsa. These are all taken from the classical texts. It is a type of fever. It is a fever of exogenous origin caused by invasion of invisible beings. We call that as Bhuta. The nearest equivalent is Vishakrimi. That is a toxic organism that comes and attacks the body. But the whole difference is that in Ayurveda, we say that instead of focusing on the virus, we must focus on the host. So that is why in Ayurveda, there is not going to be a single medicine which we will discuss. So anybody makes a claim of I had COVID, my whole family, 9 members had COVID, including my 83-year-old mother. We all survived, and all of us had different presentations. We all took Ayurveda, but very different prescriptions. So, and we did not have to invent any new medicine to treat our problems. We just had to reconstitute. What we call as repurposing is always the approach of Ayurveda. The herbs are there. You need to just recombine them to meet a new demand in that host system. So when our treatments are host-centric, which means that it will always be personalized. We are not trying to attack the virus at all. An antiviral approach is not the approach of Ayurveda. And today what we know is also, COVID has clearly demonstrated to us that if you are leading a healthy life, if your immune system is not prone to a hyperreaction, COVID becomes very mild. It's just like any other flu. So I'm not saying that we don't need antiviral approach. That is there on one side, but that's not where Ayurveda is going to contribute. People are also researching on whether Ayurvedic herbs have components which can, bind to the spike protein or the Mpro or, of the virus or of the ACE2 receptor in the human body. That studies can also go on. We ourselves analyzed some herbs in our lab and found many Ayurvedic formulations have many chemicals which in silico studies or in vitro studies show promise. Some of them could even stop a cytokine storm because they are having immunomodulatory activities.
Right.
But that's not the logic on which an Ayurvedic physician treats.
Right.
So
that's more like taking just certain medicinal elements of Ayurveda, but a modern medicine approach.
Yeah, that's okay. For research, it's okay. But that we cannot avoid these hybrid approaches because it's a free world. I cannot tell somebody shouldn't think in that way. But if you want to get the best out of Ayurveda, you must use its own theoretical framework. It will have its limitations, but it will give you another understanding. Because I have myself published some cases on patients with some. I didn't get much chance to treat, but I collaborated with some Ayurveda physicians, including their allopathic doctor, who in a very severe case of COVID-19, the government was taking a very conservative approach. They said we should treat only mild, moderate cases. Because that doesn't need Ayurveda. In fact, if you don't treat such patients, they will do better. That is my experience. Because most of them get unnecessary modern medications. They go and take ivermectin or in stages where modern doctors themselves say you shouldn't be eating those medicines. But sometimes patients do that. Doctors prescribe, azithromycin. First stage of COVID-19, you shouldn't be taking it. So the thing is that many Ayurveda practitioners, because of, I'm cutting a very big story short because of lack of time. This paper will give an idea. If somebody is interested, you can search this out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very long narrative. And that would be my answer, because here I have tried to answer that whole question. What are the implications? How we understand? This approach enables us to customize treatment for COVID-19 patients. I've been part of the government task force for Ayush response to COVID-19, worked with some clinicians, though I did not directly involve in practice. I became a COVID patient myself. So from that perspective, I can say that it's not the modern clues that we get, which are also interesting. Probably we can discover some good compounds from Ayurveda that could prove to be good antivirals. That's fine. But that's not what we can get from Ayurveda. Is a personalized, which is very important for COVID patients, because their presentations are very different. And my general hunch, because I cannot make a claim, is that if we manage the first phase of COVID very carefully, we can prevent long COVID complications. That's my experience. What I've seen most of the time, people are hesitant. In the first 3 days, they deny it's COVID. They ignore. Then they are afraid to go to the doctor. They're afraid to test. And by the time, they find that they have to face that reality, the disease has already progressed. So at the slightest doubt, give the benefit of the doubt, nothing to lose. You don't need any medicine. Start changing your diet, your pattern, lifestyle, bring good nutritious food, take some simple herbal remedies, and then you can tide over that first phase, before before it turns into a crisis. Then you can avoid a lot of complications that would come into the future. This, I think, is the takeaway based on my experience. We are doing more work and research. We are expecting some good publications to come out in the next months. So great scientists like Bhushan Patwardhan, even doctors from ICMR, like VM Katur, they were all involved. So we had a very critical environment where modern doctors, scientists, and Ayurveda practitioners work together. We're really looking forward to see some evidence in the future, which will give us a better idea of what Ayurveda can do. So I would leave it there.
Yeah. Sorry, we have taken a lot of your time. If you could just be there to answer 2 questions. I know there are many questions that I'm skipping, but these are 2 questions that I really wanted to bring it, and then we will close with that. One from Ramanan says, you spoke about the randomized control test, RCT. Is the use of RCT in alignment with the ethos of Ayurveda, or at most a compromise that Ayurveda has to do for acceptance in West?
Is that the question?
Yes.
Yes, it's all a question of, strategy. I wouldn't call it as compromise.
Okay.
It's a strategy. So if you ask me, is RCT the way to prove Ayurveda? No. But when you want to see what is the best way to get people interested in Ayurveda, so such few studies like this can turn the tables. And then we can have people on because right now we are not on the same platform. And modern science is talking from a higher pedestal and telling us, where is the evidence? This is the only way, and we cannot, count. So we just accommodate. I would say it is not compromise, it's accommodation. It is a strategy. And as long as it's a dialogue, we are open to doing some study. And then once we do a few studies, I would say that, see, come on, now you know that there's something in here. Now let us do research in the way more suited for Ayurveda. That's the way I think. But some landmark studies should be done. 4 or 5 such studies can, completely change the perspective. But otherwise, we had to spend crores of rupees to do that studies. I don't know why we invest so much money to do such complicated studies. And there are other ways. Ayurveda is already in practice. Human data can be collected with rigorous documentation. In allopathy, because it's first in human, that's why preclinical, all those things are needed. Here, everybody is taking these medicines already. In India, we have enough people using Ayurvedic medicines. If you have a doubt whether anybody has, I don't know why the government is not investing on that. Do blood tests across the population, find out if their kidneys are damaged, if their liver is being damaged, if there is really an epidemic of heavy metal misuse. That is not being done. We get 1 or 2 rare cases coming, and doctors make a big, fuss about it, and make YouTube videos. If you look at the numbers, they are just, if you look at the number of Ayurveda population getting these medicines, these instances are very, very rare, and there could be many, many reasons why it is happening. I have myself used Resa medicines. I have tested my kidneys, my liver very frequently. I have done it in my family, and we have not found that allopathic doctor whom I showed, he in fact gives a report that when he uses these medicines, kidney, liver functions are getting better. So there is a way these medicines are prepared. So these things can easily be studied. So what kind of research we should do should be prioritized. There are some kind of research work that will be strategic. Some kind of research work that is very fundamental, which we have to do to, back up our science. And for that, the government has to have, it doesn't help if we have Ayush and health ministries, in a diplomatic embrace. I mean, we need to have a more straightforward interaction in the interest of the people. Then we can generate a lot of data, and I think we'll know better.
So I would like to end this with a question from Sundara Velavan, who had asked quite a few questions, but I had to choose one. So where he is asking, is it possible to develop the equivalent of a general systems theory in medicine that can integrate the various systems of medicine and help develop treatment that incorporates insights and knowledge from the various systems?
Yeah, I have always been thinking about a meta framework, because when we look into integrative medicine, and I felt that Ayurveda is actually an attempt to create such a meta framework. But I feel we will need that if we have, because Ayurveda we have Tadartha Gari, using something similar to the cause also. We have opposite to the cause, opposite to the disease. All approaches are described. With my limited exposure to other systems, I have not found any system trying to create that larger framework to accommodate. Because modern medicine would try to eliminate whatever doesn't fit into its criteria and say that this is, what. So even when you say integration, modern integration is force fitting everything into that framework. Whereas in Ayurveda, it is a little bit more accommodative. So that does not mean I would say that we can learn that from Ayurveda. Maybe the language of Ayurveda alone is not enough, but we need a meta framework. That's what I meant by a common foundational course in medicine, which incorporates, this framework, and then people can choose different. And unless that becomes the foundation of medical training, we cannot have true integrative medicine. We will only have pluralistic, conflicting medical systems, and that will be spell disaster for the public, where the uninformed patient has to integrate. That is what is happening in India. Integration is patient driven. It's not system driven.
Thank you, Dr. Rammanohar, for an enlightening talk, but more importantly, the Q&A session, where we had to stop at some point in time because there are many more questions. But it was really interesting. I have, as you are a practitioner, you are a doctor, you are a researcher. You've seen all these medicinal systems, and you have strong views. I'm just just another normal person who has certain views on various medicinal systems, and it cannot be as informed as any medical practitioner. But I would say my approach. I would like to take a more serious look at Ayurveda. I have a lot of personal doubts, but maybe we can have a more detailed conversation at some other point
Sure.
To really look at what is it that we can overall. Let's first talk about the country India in terms of how we can get more out of this for the overall well-being of people here. Whether it is taken by other countries, others, that's secondary. I mean, the primary focus here is what can we do, which we can gain from a very long-serving medicinal knowledge system, which is practiced by plenty of people and believed by much more than. One of the points that I wanted to mention was the passion with which the beneficiaries, the people who have benefited from it, present Ayurveda is in fact much bigger than what the practitioners, the doctors have been presenting. The way in any forum where you discuss about this, invariably somebody will come and say, "Hey, I got cured when I couldn't get cured by so many other medicinal systems, and therefore I have faith in that." So it is something that is presented primarily by the ones who have benefited from this. But still, when there are strong medicinal systems, they have to be compared, contrasted, as you say. Strategically, the RCTs have to be taken into account. Certain proofs are required. So I think we have, I have learned a lot from this talk. Thank you. And I'm sure those who have been following this would have also and many have promised to see this later in the day. So this entire talk will be available for all of them to follow. Thank you very much. It has been great.